Dr. Rademacher has been a part of this project since the beginning and is also a swine extension veterinarian at Iowa State University and is also serving as the interim director of the Iowa Pork Industry Center. He's going to talk to us about focusing on individual sows to improve sow livability. Thanks, Chris.
All right. You hear me in back okay? All right, very good. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate being able to share some of the information for you today. And appreciate all my collaborators certainly on this project. So as Jason kind of explained to you, this was some of the demonstration projects. Obviously, some of the stuff, as you saw that Jason was doing, we've got some novel stuff, a lot of it that gets done in the bench tops, and some of it is just simple demonstration projects. And that's really what we were kind of focusing on here. You know, I don't think, it comes as a big surprise to anybody what sow mortality's done, particularly in about that 2014, 2015, undoubtedly accelerated, by several factors, pelvic organ prolapse probably being a primary one, some changes in sow housing being another one, but we've really seen this rampant increase in sow mortality. So the primary objective that we wanted to look at is, well, what can we do, just simple on-farm type of interventions to be able to do something about it. So, and this really came from a long time ago in my practice days. We had a summer intern where we just told that summer intern, hey, we'd like you to go into this farm every day and just kind of after they go ahead and feed the sows, go in there, take a look at, try to identify those sows that don't look like they're getting up and eating, and just kind of document why they aren't and treat them, and let's see if we can do something about sow mortality. So it was a 6-week project, and sure enough, we saw sow mortality kind of go down, and then when she left to go back for college, sow mortality went right back up. So it was one of those things that you kind of just file in the back of your head and you say, I wonder, could we really take that and train the farm and staff and employees? Could we duplicate that? Could that be replicated? Could we train the staff, and then could we walk away from that, and could they continue and maintain that? So that was really kind of what we're looking at. And really what we wanted to do is we wanted to spend some time with the employees on the farm, and everything was about identifying and treating disadvantaged sows. And it really was kind of like an extension of individual pig care, right? ABC pigs, the group from Zoetis, it spent a lot of time on. It's all about catching them early. And we know lameness is one of the primary drivers, as we saw here in the data set that I'll share from you. The problem is if we wait until that sow's 3-legged lame, then we hear, we treat them with that and they don't get any better. Well, that's because usually by that time the infection's gone and the damage has been done, and then we just wind up with a bunch of employees that are extremely frustrated because the treatments aren't working. Well, what if we got in there and caught those a whole lot earlier? So that really was one of the things, but we knew that was something that we know it's important, but we know, and particularly today with the current labor constraints, we're going to ask them to do some additional things in the sow farm, right? So we wanted to try to get some estimation about what was going to be the time requirement and try to get some idea of what a return on investment might look like on that. And then like we said, well, we know we were going to put some additional effort into that farm, and maybe we'd see something short term, but could we train the farm on it, and could we walk away from it and continue on, hopefully seeing a reduction in mortality after we had left? So the farm that we saw, it was a farm, rather old, and it was one of those farms, started out as 1,000 sows and then expanded to 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 farms, right? So, multiple expansions, probably wasn't the easiest farm, kind of a little bit of an older farm, conventional. It was 3 big B&G buildings, stall breeding and gestation, and the outcome that we were looking at was annualized sow mortality and sow and gilt deaths. But we weren't doing anything in farrowing. But any sow that died in farrowing, that was going to be counted against us. So everything that we did was all in breeding and gestation. Well, that's where the sow spends 85% of her production cycle anyway, but nothing was done in farrowing throughout that. But it was traditional PRRS and mycoplasma positive, mash fed in drop boxes, but fed once per day. And that was a little bit of what we thought is generally, just like you and I, hey, if we're not feeling well, what's the first thing that we stop doing? We stop eating. So could that be maybe some of the early indications of we've got an at-risk sow that we need to be looking at closer and doing some sort of treatment intervention? The sow farm at that time was trending at about 17% sow mortality, and we spent 2 weeks, Monday through Friday, in there with the farm staff in the middle of June of 2021. So what were some of the sow mortality reasons that we pulled from the database going into that? Really, if you look at them, kind of combine them into 3 buckets. They were pelvic organ prolapse were about 1/3, lameness and downers were about 1/3, and then you had sudden deaths, which were a little bit less than a third. That's really kind of, if we thought about the three big buckets that we were trying to attack, that's what the farm saw. So what we would do is we'd get out there right after the farm showered in right behind them. They would go ahead and wait for us, and then we'd go in. We'd team up in teams of two. We'd have one of the ISU veterinarians and then one of the gestation barn staff, and we'd walk them. So they would go ahead, they would flip the feeders on, and then we'd put one person in front, one person behind, and we would go ahead and walk through those. So, and we knew they were bigger breeding and gestation barns, so we knew we had about 30 minutes to get through and try to do a quick evaluation of those. So we knew we weren't going to be able to do detailed evaluation. So really the goal with that was really just to flag those, to come back later and take a closer look at them. So like I said, the goal was really to try to get through and get them all assessed before those sows started laying down. All right, you have to bear with me for a second. I embedded the videos, but for whatever reason, this computer won't play them in there, so I'm going to attempt to show you a little bit of that. But I need to pull that open. Oh, there it shows up. Okay. So there you just see an example of the two-man teams. You got everybody else out eating except the one sow. So you've got one person in the back getting them up, kind of taking a look at them, taking a closer look. And then what I don't quite show you, didn't record it, is then they've got a card that they would just go ahead and fill up and flag, and then they'll come back later in the day and go ahead and do an assessment of them at that time. So this is one of the things that they would commonly see once they got those sows up, right? So we'd actually, once we got her up, she would eat, but if you really just kind of sit back and watch them for a little bit, you know, this is probably one because she is up eating, you know, maybe one that doesn't normally get noticed, but, you know, you got one that's, there's a reason why she's sitting there doing that. So now the trick to see if I can get back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So that's kind of what we were looking from the disadvantaged and at-risk sows. So there's an example of one just saw feed. You got two of them right next to them. She's already eaten. You got one that clearly didn't want to get up. She still got the feed in front of her. So she just went ahead and got flagged, had a treatment card filled out in front of her. So the advantage of that, and not wanting to really put a lot of burden on the sow farm staff, we just said, hey, let's just flag them, and then they can come back later in the day when it works best for the staff, because particularly during that time of year, it was June, right? So they were wanting to get in, do the heat check, and get the breeding done before it got really hot during the day. So generally they would do that, do the heat check, do the breeding, move sows into farrowing. Then in the afternoon, they would come back and see, okay, well, did she get up eventually and eat? Or if she didn't, okay, let's look to see, get her back up, take an evaluation for her. And then we didn't do anything with the farm's SOP. We just took the veterinary prescribed treatment protocol. We went ahead and we said, you just do whatever it says. If it's an off feed, look to your veterinary protocol. If it's lame, look to your veterinary protocol and treat them accordingly. So that's really what the staff did. So they kind of came back later in the day when it worked for them after the rest of their chores were done, and went ahead and got that done. So we collected a little bit of information, you know, for the 2 weeks that we were in there. What did we see? Obviously, probably because it was the easiest to see, and that's what we were looking for. Off-feed was the primary sign. We had about 30% of them that had multiple symptoms, with the most common one of those being off-feed and lame. If we look at, from the parity standpoint, which ones were we seeing most commonly? Now, this is not adjusted for parity. These are just the raw numbers, but the gilts were obviously the ones that we found most commonly off. So we went ahead and did this in June, and we went back and pulled the data at 8 weeks, and then we pulled it at the end of the year and just did a simple SPC charting. And what we noticed with that then was, if we compared the 23 weeks before we began the intervention to the 23 weeks after the intervention, on that farm we saw about a 4.25% reduction in annualized mortality. So they went from 16.75% to 12.5%. And in that system, they went from probably medium to poor to probably the best or the second best farm in terms of sow mortality in that system. And it was really interesting, you know, going through that. About the third or fourth day, the guys doing the breeding and gestation, like, they got it right away. They got really excited about it because that was fewer dead sows that they had to pull. And because, they had one of those farms that had multiple barns because of the way the barns grew. It was really difficult. It took a lot of time to drag dead sows, out and a lot of labor. So it's like, hey, if I spend a little more time here, that's less time I got to drag dead sows out. So it became really clear and apparent for the farms that, hey, this is going to be a better way of doing business. So they could really see what the win was for them. So what was that worth? And Lee will tell you a little bit more about the model, so I'm not really going to spend a lot of time with that. Really the model, certainly a lot of opportunity costs, and not losing pregnant females, some additional sow income, fewer replacement females. It worked out to be about $50 per sow when we ran that model. And that farm was running about 25 PSY, so it works out to be about $2 a sow in savings. What was the time commitment? So it took us generally about 2 hours per day for that at-risk identification for those additional people. But we really felt like, we had people in there already doing the alleyway sweeping and things like that. So some of that time was probably things that they would normally be doing in there anyway, although certainly it was going to take a little bit more time to take a closer look and document on those cards. But we recognize that certainly is going to vary on herd size and the number of barns and rooms that you have. And then took an hour per day for the follow-up treatment for one person or two people if they had to go back and do the more detailed evaluation as well. So if we kind of round all that together for that farm, it probably took an additional FTE to get that. We did go ahead and repeat this kind of on a phase 2 earlier this year on a pen gestation farm. It was one that they were in stalls till about 55 days and then in pens after that time period. During that time period, we did some additional training of the farm and also senior sow service staff while we were out there. That one we did 7 days straight with that. So it was a little bit different learnings. That was a little bit different setup. That one actually took a little bit longer to do. We had a few more buildings. We still did them in 2-man teams, and that still felt like the key. Some of the things that was a little bit different, we obviously, because sows were in pens, we saw a little bit more vulva biting, so we spent a little bit more time, attempting to do some treatments on those. Gilt treatments, we saw, more gilts that were off feed. It was a farm that had some active mycoplasma infection, so gilts were off feed longer, so that took a little bit longer to evaluate that. So that also made it a little bit more difficult to interpret off feed around the post-weaning and around breeding. Generally, for the gilts, there's a longer time period for gilts and for sows that they were off feed. And then it was just some interesting observations about some of those animals that are difficult to get up, maybe ones that suffer from front leg lameness, even though they may not show it. So that was just really kind of interesting on that. On that one, and it'll be interesting to see, that system had already, based on the learnings from the first one, they'd started to implement a lot more of the aggressive treatments on the second farm. So we knew we probably weren't going to see as big of improvement on that, but just interesting that we would see kind of a spike whenever they brought gilts in. Once again, probably related to the mycoplasma status of the farm and of the replacement gilts that were coming in. But as we did the training here, what we've noticed is, we're starting to see we still see these peaks when the gilts come in, but the peaks are not near as high in duration, and they come down a whole lot quicker as well. So we'll continue to monitor that farm as well. So I think in summary, it's just another thing. It's a prioritization question, right? I think there's value there. It kind of goes back to husbandry. We just may have forgotten about the importance of early detection and individual sow treatment. We all know it's important, but it gets to be a prioritization question with everything else that needs to be done, and we know it's probably going to take some additional labor, but it works. If that's something you want to improve on, and you spend more time looking for those disadvantaged sows and can catch them early, there's certainly opportunity to drive some mortality out of the system by doing that. And I think the unique opportunity, particularly in those farms that feed once a day, you have a unique opportunity to see those sows that aren't, if they're not eating. Now, pigs in grow finish, they eat all day long, right? So we don't have that opportunity to see, well, is that pig really eating or not eating until they're starting to lose body weight or body condition, right? So there's kind of a unique opportunity to do that. So it's fairly easily implementable. It does take some additional time and effort. And then just to flag them, not necessarily you need to do all the treating, although that's kind of up to the farm, but at least flag them during that morning feeding and then come back and treat them when they're appropriate. So once again, thanks to all my fellow veterinarians from the Swine Medicine Education Center that came out and helped, and all my field epi team who helped put all the data together, and then the group from Iowa Select, and Dr. Williams will tell us a little bit more about some of the information they did. So once again, QR code if you want to get to the Pig Livability org for more information, and we'll take questions at the end during the panel. Thank you very much. I'll get Knowles pulled up if you want to